You told me about this place, that's why I came here.
I know how sanitary it's got to be, so I'm just out here.
Luckily, since it's just a class, we're doing more like hypothetical than we are, anything else. That being said, though, I've taken these from like the back rooms of hydro stores after I've done all my tests and everything, and showing everybody demonstrations. I'll have oysters growing out of some of these bins when I get home. It just depends on how thorough I was when I was doing it there.
Nice. This thing's acting crazy. I think I need to recalibrate it.
You ever seen that? Isn't that crazy?
I don't know why.
I was trying to get my friend to come. Yeah.
Anybody else not get a raffle ticket? Just you?
Yeah.
Just give them 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started. I'm one of the owners of Uncle Mike's, and basically what I am here to do today is give you guys all a brief introduction on how to grow your own mushrooms at home. Everything that I'm going to be going over today is going to apply to pretty much every mushroom that you could ever want to grow, the fun ones, the culinary ones, whatever it may be. If you want to grow your own ink caps to make your own ink just to be extra fancy on Etsy, you can do all of that. The big thing with anything you're going to do throughout this process is do a little bit of research on your own before you pick a strain. If you're, going to be fruiting out a Black Pearl King, they are going to have a different fruiting requirement than what lion's mane is going to have, or what a dung-loving mushroom is going to have. If you're growing a tree side fruiter, that's going to have different conditions than somebody that's growing a top fruiter in bins or bags. So 5-minute Google search to see what the environment is that you're looking for. Does it take anything like a cold snap to trigger this into bloom? All those things are literally a 5-minute Google search away. If you're doing any type of foraging and you're trying to clone these mushrooms, please make sure that you are doing your due diligence on actually, hey, this is verified, this is what it is. Take pictures of the gills, all that stuff before you, accidentally clone a poisonous mushroom and take it home. So, everywhere that I do these, I try to preach this as much as humanly possible of pick an area that you are going to do this. The area that you're going to be doing this in is going to be the most cleanest room absolutely possible. Everything that you can do to keep down on contamination, filter your airflow, whatever, that's all going to aid you throughout this entire process, especially as you start to scale up with doing some of these things. Obviously, somebody that's just doing 1 or 2 bags for fun isn't going to need a 4x8 room to grow all of their mushrooms in and have them on racks and things of that nature. But if you're going to do something small scale, please just make sure the area you're putting it in is clean. Takes a couple of bucks to go up to Home Depot, get some Kills latex paint, and just real quick, let's throw a layer on the closet to make it a little bit cleaner than what we were working with originally. There's a couple of products out there like Sanidate and Xeritol. They are hydrogen peroxide based cleaners. They work phenomenal at cleaning up grow rooms as well as cleaning up your mushroom environment. The peroxide doesn't tend to hurt the mycelium in large doses like that. If you're, you got a rack sitting in your room and you need to spray down the walls behind it just as a weekly cleaning regimen, it's not gonna affect anything that's already growing in bins. So peroxide cleaners, alcohol cleaners, you know, just use your better judgment. Do not use bleach on anything that is gonna be coming into contact with mycelium. It doesn't matter how good you think you rinsed it out of plastic, bleach is going to leach into there and it will stay in there for months to come, and it will be one of your biggest downfalls if you're using bins. So, once we got our area cleaned up and we're happy, we've got that OCD fix, you know, accomplished, and we know we're ready to move forward, there's a couple places I like to personally start, and most people, at least as you scale up, are going to get into the world of flow hoods. But starting off, you can get yourself a 20 to 30 gallon clear bin from Home Depot for 15 to 20 bucks. Drill 2 holes into the side of it just so that you have holes big enough for you to stick your arms through. That's just a cheap still air box that you can use that's going to help keep down on contamination throughout this process.
As sure the holes are big enough that your arms aren't rubbing.
Yeah, that is a big thing with it, because you got to figure if your arm's rubbing, you're going to be flaking off things on the inside there. So, Bella Bora is another great company that makes still air boxes that are readily affordable to most people. They're like anywhere from, I believe, the $45 to $60 range. They're just little pop-up PVCs with clear, PVC mesh around it so that you can actually work inside of it. That is the best place to start so that you have a clean environment. If you don't want to spend the money to get something like that, realistically, make sure that there is no airflow going on in the room you're working in. So no ceiling fans, even if you have one of those bathroom exhaust fans, turn that off. You want as little air movement in the place that you are planning on working as humanly possible if you're not going to be working in front of a flow hood or at least inside of a still air box. So like right now, how I'm gonna be doing most of this is gonna be right out in the open, all right? Out in the open like this, we have somewhere between a 50 to 75% chance of success across our bags for however thorough I can get with cleaning up with alcohol, just in the area we're working in right now. If I add a still air box, I'm taking that 50 to 70% and I'm bumping that up to closer to 80, 90%. If you have a flow hood, you're closer to the 99%. No matter what you do, there's always going to be one exception to the rule. You can do 100 bags, you always get one that wants to just be like, haha, you didn't get me. So don't get discouraged by it, but it's going to be a pretty normal thing across the world of mycology that you run into. Something as simple as you playing with these bags too much after inoculation, you create, weak points in the folds on the bags. Things will get in there like that. So as we get into this, there's more stuff that you're gonna realize, or, okay, it's more of a hands-off process than what I'm allowing myself to do. So, we got our still air box, we got our flow hood, or we've got our area clean, and again, 70% to 90% alcohol. If you have a low airflow environment, just spritz down the table, spritz down the environment you're in. That's gonna be better than nothing. Spray your hands. I personally take my syringes and wipe them off. It's something that you're gonna be coming into contact with. You're gonna be pulling this way, doing that. You're gonna be moving things around. These go and they sit in a box, they go into a fridge, they're sitting at your local grocery store or whatever for however long. It's just good practice that if I'm gonna be touching it, I'm going to clean it. So, spray off your syringes. If you got paper towel, wipe them down. Your needles, I personally tend to heat treat them even when they come fully sealed like this. It is not uncommon to think about it. These come in little machine gun packs where you pull apart 25 of them sitting there. It's not uncommon for one of these to get a little micro nick in there, and this gets some type of contamination from the airflow around it. So that's a big part of this, is just, if you think you can clean it, clean it. So, personally, what I like doing with all of my syringes before I waste them on a bag is I get agar plates. These little plates come in a 6-pack. They're really easy to use. All you do is clean off the outside of them with a little bit of alcohol, wipe it down if you have paper towel handy, get yourself nice and cleaned up. And what you're gonna do is there's a little tiny membrane around these. You're gonna undo it and open it up if you can hopefully get it off with gloves. So throughout this process, it's not necessary, but I would recommend, you know, some type of face mask or, you know, something that's gonna stop you from sneezing on your nice clean environment if you're doing this in the wide open. Even if you're doing this in front of a flow hood, I still recommend it, especially for this portion of it. But what you are going to do is once the area is fully cleaned, you are going to take your cap off of your syringe after you've shaken it up. I let these come to room temperature before I do anything in my grow with this. If you put it in too cold, it tends to make a little bit of condensation and adds a little bit extra moisture throughout the process that can in turn actually drown your mycelium as they're just developing. So just keep that in mind, shake them up, make sure they're room temperature before you start. Again, once it's all clean, you're gonna take your cap off. And for this portion, I don't tend to use a needle for it. I tend to try to save those for the bags that I'm gonna be inoculating. But you are just going to take the lid off ever so slightly, get it as close as you can, and then just a couple of drops right on in. Cap your syringe back up, put it into the fridge, and what you're gonna do is just reseal this disc back up. So, I use micropore tape for anything that I am trying to, you know, test. I will use that almost saran-like tape for anything that I'm doing for long-term storage. So essentially, that's all you really need. And you're gonna let this sit out in the open, you know, just wherever you had set up your sterile environment. It's gonna take about roughly 7 to 14 days for things to start growing on this plate. They could be good things, they could be bad things. It depends on the environment you were working in and everything like that. But that is the best way to test your syringe before wasting it on a bag. Now, in about 7 to 10 days, if you have something that's really nice and healthy, you will inevitably get something that looks like this. And I'm gonna pass this around in a second. That is a nice, healthy mycelium network. I can take a scalpel to this plate and cut this up into a bunch of little tiny pieces. And if you look at the center on this plate as I'm passing it around, that is just a chunk that is from another agar plate, all right? It does not take much to start a bag or start a plate when you've already got mycelium living. So realistically, you know you have a clean one, take a couple little chunks, put them on a couple of agar plates. I'll take them and I'll rewrap them. I'll set them in the fridge on a 45-degree angle. That slows down the mycelium's growth, so you can hold on to that plate in the fridge for, I'd say, anywhere from 6 months to a year if you're keeping it at the proper temperature. You do not want them freezing. You're trying to stay relatively below 45, so you know, a nice cold beer is about as close to freezing as you want to get with those. So, once we know that we have a clean specimen to work with, we're gonna pick our bags. Now, a big thing that we get questions with is, well, what bag do I use for what mushroom, and you know, is there a difference with it? You can grow any mushroom on millet, rye, popcorn kernel, Uncle Ben's, whatever it may be. Exactly. What it comes down to is the timeline that you want this mushroom to be able to be transplantable. If you are on a strict set schedule, I recommend going with millet. It tends to be a little bit easier for the mycelium to actually crawl across because there isn't so many gaps between all of the seeds that are actually in the bag. It doesn't have to make a bridge for mycelium to connect itself. It just crawls right on over the bag until you get to something that kind of looks like this. So, rye, on the other hand though, is a longevity way of going at it, is the best way that I can look at it. If I'm constantly going on vacations. I'm having medical complications or anything like that where I know I'm gonna be gone for a week at a time, or this or that, or hey, somebody in the family's sick. Rye is the way to go. I say that because millet, once it's fully colonized, you have about roughly a month before it needs to be transplanted. Rye, on the other hand, you can have that sitting on a shelf for 6 to 8 months and it'll be totally fine before it finally starts digesting itself. So, personally, I'm a millet fan. I'm a quick, fast, and a hurry person. I am instant gratification all of the way. I don't like to wait. This little hobby that has turned into a profession has basically completely killed my soul on how much and how quickly I want certain things to be done. Because it's like, oh, I use this strain and it fully colonizes a bag in 10 days, but I used that strain and hey, it took 3 months to even get to something the size of, I'd say, a quarter in there. It's going to vary across the board for whatever strain you're doing. That's part of the reason why we tell people, you know, do a little bit of that 5-minute research before you start this strain. There is so many different variations and genetics out there for all these different mushrooms that you could ever want to grow. And you'll find ones that you'll come across that won't even germinate in a room like this with this type of temperature. It takes being germinated in a freaking wine fridge for almost 3 months just to get to something the size of a quarter. So keep that in mind, that 5-minute research before you start picking and choosing is gonna be your best friend with this. So, we figured out what bag we wanna use. We know our syringe is good after we tested it on agar. We are gonna go ahead and before we inject this, we're gonna start cleaning off our bags. You're gonna clean off your area. I like making sure I get in between the gussets, even though we're just injecting at the port. It's just something that's like, if I'm gonna be touching it, or I think anything can happen where I touch it, I'd rather it be clean. Biggest thing is just that front injection port. So, I picked the worst bottle to bring with me. So once you're good and clean and hopefully not a fire hazard, if you are going to sterilize your needle in a still air box, keep in mind that if you just sprayed alcohol, you are making a bomb. Unless you're really cold, but even still, don't recommend it, especially with a beard. So, everything's good and cleaned up. Our alcohol is hopefully dissipated enough to do this. Heat up your needle. You do not need to get your needle glowing red. Oh my gosh, there's a little bit of soot on there. That's not the end of the world. The bigger thing is just making sure that it's been sterilized with about 10 seconds of flame. At this point, you don't want to be talking to anybody. You don't want to be doing anything to move a whole lot of air around because you have all of this exposed. So, once it has cooled down and you are again, you feel confident in how sterile everything is in the environment around you, right into the center of the gray patch, you're gonna put anywhere from 3 to 5 mLs in there. So at most, an entire, or a half a syringe into a bag. Put your needle back away so you're not poking yourself, stabbing yourself, or calling me going, am I gonna grow a mushroom out of my finger now? Once you do all that, you are more than likely gonna notice that some of that moisture that you put in there is starting to pull up on the bottom of these bags. Typically what I tend to do is I'll be working on 10, 20 of these at a time, and you know, I'll get 5 done and I'll rotate it and set it on its side. You know, I'll get another couple bags done, flip it over. You just wanna try to move that moisture around inside of the grain to keep everything as even as humanly possible. Think of it like this. Anything that's on bottom, if it's just a pool of liquid, you are basically waterboarding your mushrooms. They are sitting there drowning as they are starting. Shoot.
Do you suggest not to knead the...
Do not knead the bag. Do not knead the bag. So you are trying to avoid any type of harassment to the bag is the best way I can put it. You know, realistically, the less you touch these, the better. There is going to be 2 points where you're really going to be messing with them. It's going to be transplant, and you know, I tend to break these up about halfway. So if I see something at least the size, I would say, of like that disc, you know, on a corner here, I'll break everything up in the bag and kind of knead it and shake it around that one time. I'm not gonna go super hard into it or anything like that. I'm just gonna give it a quick little shake, break it up ever so slightly, and then it's back onto the shelf. Once I know that that mycelium's been buried under some of that grain in there. So once you mix it, it's gonna take about 2 weeks from that softball size is what we notice most of the time in-house. In about 2 weeks after you've gotten that softball size mass, you've broken it up, you're gonna get to probably about halfway to this. This is a severely overgrown bag that really wants to finish its life out right now. Honestly, we bring these out just to kind of show people what the actual longevity is on these. That's from 8/6 of last year.
Wow.
So you can keep stuff healthy, you can keep stuff happy, but basically you get to this point right here, this is like I should have been transplanting this about 2-3 months ago, all right? If you get to this point here where it's that overgrown, personally, find something that, you know, get a couple extra bags because that mycelium is gonna take off. There's so much going on in this bag right now that I could probably start with the King Blues at least. I could probably do about 4 of these 4-pound substrates to do for like the culinary stuff. If I was doing something like a dung lover or a top fruiting mushroom, you could probably do a max of 2 of those 4-pounders, or you could do, you know, 8-pound, or, you know, you could break it up into a bunch of little 2-pound blocks, however you want to do it. But once we get to this point here, you got a couple of options on what you're going to do next with it. You can either go with the bin method or you can go with bags. Personally, I am more of a bag guy than a bin guy. I've been converted back and forth throughout the years of, hey, you know, bins have more surface area, bags do this, this does that. I am a see a need, fill a need kind of guy. If I need to utilize bins for certain strains, you're gonna utilize bins for certain strains. At the end of the day, there are some that are going to need more fresh air than what these bags can truly provide for the strain that you're growing. Good example, lion's mane right here. If I don't cut necks into that bag, it's just gonna try fruiting up top on inside of here. There's not enough fresh air that it's gonna get an actual full head to it. It's gonna stay real spindly. That's gonna look real weird and real nasty, and it's not even gonna look like a beautiful, almost stalactite mushroom. So just keep in mind there's a couple of different trade-offs for everything. First one I'm gonna go over is gonna be the bags. So if you're doing bags, most of our bags are already designed for you to grow right on into them, whether it's the 2-pound, 4-pound, or the 8-pounders, at least for the substrates, whether it's the hardwood or the CVG mixes. I'm doing all culinary here today, so nobody gets in trouble with anything. But basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna pretend that this rye or this millet that we just inoculated here is just as beautiful as this bag, because we're gonna use this in a little bit. So saying you've gotten to this point already, what I like to do before I even really start cleaning them up is just break them up a little bit before I get started with everything. It's going to help you in the long run with what you're about to do after this. So if you have a nice loose substrate and a nice loose spawn bag, it's going to be a lot easier. You are going to spray off the outside of these bags, and you are going to get every single little nook and cranny you can get. Don't be afraid if you get it on the filter patch. I honestly recommend people wipe those off with a little bit of alcohol. But the bigger one that I always try to get people to remember about are these little gussets on the bottom. Most people go to pour these inside of it, and that's where you're holding on to it to do all of your work. So just make sure you're getting into those nooks and crannies. You're gonna do the same thing with your substrate bag. And we are gonna pretend that I had an awesome bottle of alcohol instead of this one. We're gonna pretend that this whole area is nice and clean right now. You can either use a scalpel, or you can use a nice, clean, sterilized pair of scissors to do the next part. All you are essentially doing is cleaning off your hands and hopefully getting enough alcohol off of them to not blow up. But sterilize your scalpel. Yeah, you survived. Wait for it to cool down. And then all you're gonna do for these bags is cut the top right on off of your substrate first. Next, get your spawn. And again, we're just pretending that this is all fully colonized already. And get this guy nice and open. And this guy is. And essentially, all you're gonna do is dump right on in there. I do a 1-to-1 ratio most of the time for these bags if you're only doing like a 2-pounders. Most of your culinary stuff, if you really want to, you can do as high as like a 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 pounds of substrate to 1 pound of spawn. That'll start your blocks off real nice. If you're doing like the dung lovers, you know, or any of the fun ones, I'd strongly recommend that you do either a 1-to-1 or at lowest a 2-to-1 ratio. So I honestly can't tell you how many times I get phone calls every week. Well, I put a pound of spawn in with, you know, 8 pounds of substrate, and you know, there's this green speck in the corner there. Am I contaminated? Yeah, you're contaminated because you didn't have enough warriors going into this battle whatsoever. You are trying to have enough mycelium across the board for anything that you're doing to basically cover every spot within about a 1/4 of an inch. Basically, you don't see a white chunk, you don't see seed or anything like that within a 1/4 of an inch of another one. Keep mixing, all right? So, got it in the bag, you've rolled over the top. You can use paper clips, binder clips, you can use chip clips are the other popular one that a lot of people tend to use, where you're just using it to hold this thing shut for a couple of weeks. So you get a good consistent mix. And essentially, all we're gonna do now is tap it on the counter a couple of times to firm it back into a block. This is gonna go away for about 2 weeks and we're gonna completely forget about it. In 2 weeks, we have a couple different options for how we can actually finally fruit this bag out. Once it's gotten to a point pretty much like this, where that whole block is at least starting to get white like that, most of your culinaries, this is time for you to cut your X's. For most of your top fruiters, this would be when you would actually put your slit across the top on these. So once you're to this point here, you wanna basically decide where you're gonna put your holes. Or if you're doing culinaries, cut your X's. So if you were gonna do anything, you're gonna clean this off with alcohol again, sterilize your scalpel, and just simply put, you know, about a 1.5 inch X across wherever you want them to fruit out of your block. If you are doing a top fruiting mushroom or the dung lovers, the fun ones, you are going to instead take these bags, clean it off, clean, sterile scalpel, and you're gonna put a slit, I'd say about roughly 1/4 to 1/2 inch above where your substrate stops inside the bag. You're gonna do that on both sides. Only do one side at a time, otherwise this next portion really sucks. You're gonna take some micropore tape, and you are just going to basically make yourself a little clean patch for it that air can kind of pass through. It is a pain in the butt sometimes. You may have to put a couple extra strips just to feel like you got a good seal on it so that it's not, you know, allowing anything in from the top or the bottom, whatever. But once you get all of this kind of patched up so it's got a little bit of fresh air, come on, see. There. You may have to put, you know, a little bit more than expected, but just that bit of fresh air that you do from this is going to help these mushrooms actually grow. So, there we go. Oh, looks like I actually looked at it, right? So you got your little makeshift diaper on the front of this now so that you can actually get some airflow in there. Doesn't matter how many layers you put on there, air is still gonna flow out of this. It's mostly gonna be CO2 escaping the bag. Once you do that, that's gonna be the actual trigger for most of your mushrooms to actually start fruiting. So, that's the bag method. Now, honestly, there is another way to do these bags that we're gonna go over at the end, near the end, which is the all-in-one styles. But I wanna show these bins real quick. So, let's say we have a 32 quart bin here. These are Sterilite bins. These already have a foam gasket in it. They're watertight, airtight. They are mildew and mold resistant as well. They're really easy to clean after the whole process is all said and done. These are going to be more geared towards your top fruiting mushrooms. So what I tend to do with these, if you're going to make them yourself, there's two ways to make these. It just depends on the style that you're going to actually fruit out with. If you're doing a full bin and you're going to put your substrate and spawn into it, you're looking for approximately a 3 to 4 inch cake along the bottom. So once everything's mixed, it should be about 3 to 4 inches tall inside of this bin. That's where you're gonna get your maximum amount of harvest and maximum yield out of it entirely. There's a couple of holes that you gotta put in here if you're gonna make them yourself. You're gonna put a 2 inch hole on both of the short sides, just right up top. That 2 inch hole is basically where all of your fresh air is gonna come in through. These are just mason jar filter patches. You can get them off of Amazon in a 20 pack for like $5. You know, super cheap. The micro pour tape here is just covering up a bunch of 1/4 inch holes that are spaced approximately 1 inch apart from each other. You just do that on both of the long sides. That's going to be where all your CO2 is actually flowing out from. So you got fresh air coming in from up top, CO2 coming from down low. If you do everything right with these bins and have just a small amount of filtered airflow in your tent or your room, you should not have to fan these bins after transplant. So, all you're gonna do for these is, again, hopefully have an actually really nice spray bottle instead of mine. You're gonna clean everything off inside and out. I really did just grab the worst one. We're gonna pretend that's nice and clean. And hasn't been sitting in my car for 40 classes this year. So, if you get a little extra water in there from the alcohol, just get that on out, just to make sure you don't have a puddle of it at the bottom of here. Wipe them out with paper towel and everything. Once you feel that this is good and clean and you are happy with it, you're gonna go through the same process with all of your bags, your substrate bags and your spawn bags. Now, when you have a bag that is...
You don't recommend a liner? You don't recommend a liner?
Not at all.
No?
No. So the common misconception is that putting a liner in prevents side pins. You are gonna get side pins no matter what you do.
Okay.
Inevitably, all of these blocks shrink over time.
Yeah.
The mushroom's just eating mass, and you know, things are gonna get exposed to fresh air. It's gonna start fruiting from there and things of that nature. As far as I am concerned, adding a liner in anywhere is just another zone of contamination.
Okay.
If I have already cleaned this area, I brought my liner over, I set it down, all right? One side's dirty. You just contaminated everything under it. You spray off the liner, you wipe it all down, you flip it over.
It's dirty again.
It's dirty again. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd rather stick to the trouble where I know I can contain it,
Right.
versus bringing in an outside source with it. You know, I'll go as far as taking out these strips on the inside of the lid here and spraying those down with alcohol, you know?
Yeah.
Like, we're just doing this for a class, so most of this is hypothetical, and we really just want to take the extra time and extra effort to always make sure that these are wiped down, clean, and perfect before you start. Same with these bags. But again, if you got something this colonized, you really want to break it up before you get started. Hey, you laugh, those things are...
No,
I had to stand on one the last class, and I'm 215 pounds and it still wouldn't break. Yeah. So,
If I ask for a strain, do you have?
these are king blue oysters. So we typically use these for like CO2 bags and grow rooms and things of that nature. But again, if you can, before you get started, break it up as much as humanly possible. It's gonna save you a headache in the long run. So we got our bag broken up. We clean off our bags again. sure you get the undersides and all that fun stuff. Same with our substrates. And you need to be way more thorough with this if you are doing the bins than if you are doing the bags. Like with the bags, all right, I really only need to be thorough with the grain because that's what's gonna be dumped into the other bag. With this, you have to get every little bit of it because everything is gonna be over this bin. You're gonna be shaking it, you're gonna be doing whatever. So, once everything is clean to your OCD's liking, you're gonna start with your substrate again. Typically, what you wanna do is put roughly, I'd say about 85 to 90% of your substrate into the bin to get started. So just the tiniest bit. I try not to shake these. If it happens, it happens. But the less you do of this to move air around, the better. Now we're gonna take our oysters we got here, and we're gonna put them right on into the bin. What I tend to do is dump everything right on in. If something gets stuck at the bottom and this is all you're left with, don't sit there shaking it. So long, soldier, it was nice knowing you. Don't sit there and just do all this extra stuff to get one little tiny chunk out that's gonna make no difference to you in the long run. Before you mix them, since you just touched everything, spray down with alcohol one last time. It's only gonna take about 5 to 10 seconds for your hands to dry off if you just keep swirling them around. Once they're clean, into the bin we go. You are gonna break up as much of this as humanly possible. There is going to be chunks like this that you're just never gonna get, all right? That's not the end of the world, but the more you can get broken up to spread out throughout this mass, the better. So essentially, and again, we're trying to make sure that it looks like there's a grain practically every quarter of an inch. You know, if you see any spots where there's just a bunch of dirt sitting there still that you're using from this, make sure you kind of move that grain over and deal with it appropriately. Now, once you got that good, happy mix, I tend to pat these down just ever so gently. You do not want to sit there packing it like you just repotted a plant at home, all right? You should not see water or any type of moisture coming up from your fingers. If you do, chances are you have really hurt that mycelium that's over there, even though you were just mixing it up and everything like that. More than likely, you just pushing all that pressure down did more damage than you breaking it up. So, we got everything all nice and lined out. Take the rest of our substrate, dump it right on in. Try not to shake it if you don't absolutely have to get that last little bit out. And then we're gonna put a little bit of a casting layer over the top. This is just to protect that mycelium for the first couple of hours so that they can basically cauterize themselves and move on with their merry way. You do not have to do a casting layer. It's really more of a preference thing. You will still get mushrooms growing no matter what, even if you don't do it. It's just, I feel like it personally helps them. It just gives them one extra way for, you know, this little army to kind of rise up from below and make sure everything's safe and clean and happy. So, after we got our mix, we got our casting layer on, we've closed up our bin, you're not gonna touch this thing. Realistically, I put these in the dark for about the first 14 days. You don't have to. I have also done it where in my tents, I've had 3 of these bins already going on a top shelf and the light's on for 12 hours so that you know the ones below when are getting light, they're still gonna grow. It's just, they tend to be a little bit more accelerated when you're in the dark for that first initial, you know, even just 7-day window. Once you hit like day 14, and it's gonna be the same thing for you in these bags as well. You're gonna start noticing mushrooms either starting to pin or starting to web out, kind of like what they're doing on this bag here. When that happens, it is basically telling you it is time to get fresh air into the bag. or into the bin. So if you have a bin,
Aerials.
yeah. So if you have a bin and you start noticing that like you have all these tendrils and you know, hey, it's day 16 and I still don't have anything growing out of this bin, chances are you do not have enough fresh air coming into it. And what's basically happening is that CO2 is keeping it in its dormant state. You can take care of that issue a couple of different ways, and it's the same thing with the bags. You can either take the bag and get more fresh air into the bag by either putting more holes in it or even just burping the top that you sealed up. If you are doing culinary and you cut your X's, they're gonna have as much fresh air as they could ever want. You're never gonna have to really deal with it with those. But with top fruiters in a bin, you're gonna be dealing with it a lot. Depending on strain, some are gonna produce way more CO2 than others. You can either take this strip off and allow fresh air to get in there. You can get yourself a little clip fan, put that in your tent. You can have some extra air filtration coming into your tent or into the grow area. The absolute last ditch effort of getting fresh air into your bin should be fanning. Reason I say that is because a lot of times these are sitting on shelves for a couple weeks at a time. All right, there's gonna be particulates that float around no matter how much filtration you have, things are gonna happen. If you're running a humidifier in the area, you're gonna start getting calcium deposits, stuff like that, you know? All these little factors add up, but that's all stuff that's also gonna be floating around and possibly landing on top of this. So if you're gonna fan a bin, spray the top down with alcohol first before you even go to do it. Otherwise, all you're doing is going like this and just dropping all of those contaminants right on into your bin, and you just, you know, fan them right on into your substrate. So personally, I'd rather take off the strips down low for about a 10-15 minute burst and just let some of that extra CO2 get out, or just get a little bit more airflow into your environment. Like if you had a flow hood, you could essentially leave that running in your tent, and that would be enough airflow to keep everything at a happy consistency. If you don't want to, AC Infinity makes some nice little tiny low CFM inline fans. They make some nice filters. You can build your own HEPA filter from Home Depot, Menards, Lowe's, whatever. But more than likely, like if you're not seeing anything at that day, like 16 mark, it's because you have too much CO2 in your bin or in your bag. Especially if you're looking like this at that point. All right. So, typically, depending on what mushroom you grow, like if I did this lion's mane right now, actually, why don't we go ahead and do that? So, let's say I had a lion's mane that I sprayed down, cleaned it all up. We're going to sterilize our scalpel real quick. And once that cools down, just gonna put about a 1.5 inch X across it. And you do not need to open this flap or anything. Trust me, they will find that fresh air that is coming out right there, and they will start growing out of that in about the next 2 to 3 days. So your culinary ones are gonna have a much different fruiting cycle than your top fruiters. Most of your top fruiters, once you actually start seeing pins, you're roughly 5 to 10 days away from harvesting for most strains. Culinary, once you start pinning, it's really sky's the limit. It depends on how big you want your lion's mane head to be. You know, how big do you want your trumpets, your chestnuts, whatever. It really just comes down to personal preference on harvesting those. Your dung lovers, your fun ones, are going to have a very strict regimen for when they need to be harvested. Now, most of the time, what you're gonna be looking for across the board is a little membrane that is attached from the actual stem of the mushroom to the cap. That is called a veil. Typically, that veil is your 24-hour timeline, is the best way to put it for most strains. Once that starts ripping, you have roughly, I'd say, 24 hours before that cap will actually start to invert on itself and start dropping spores all over the place, making everything look like it's covered in roofing tar. So depending on what you're going for, not a good thing. Just watch your gills. If you start noticing like a little black specks popping up here and there, it's time to pull that mushroom out. All right. If the other mushrooms around it don't look like they're ready to harvest, you can attempt to leave them. Personally, I have a rule of trying to harvest the entire bin at the same time. If I can't, I leave a 12-hour window, and that is about it. After 12 hours, if a mushroom that I had plucked was right next to this little guy, and it's been 12 hours and this little guy still hasn't opened up the rest of the way, I want to get that out of there. Chances are, if it hasn't done anything in 12 hours, you bumped it, you hit it, and you know, something just as simple as having too much moisture on these lids, where that little raindrop's dropping down right on top of your mushroom is just enough to cause it to abort. So you want to get all of those out of there. Anything that doesn't look like it's on the same timeline, 12 hours, get it out of there. If you think it's still doing something, you can attempt to leave it. I personally don't like to. The less you have to get into these bins, the better. So, aborts are probably the biggest issue for people who are trying to get more than one crop out of these bins or out of the bags. You basically have just damaged this mycelium, which is now sitting there and is way more susceptible to rotting out, bacterial infections, other fungi infections, things of that nature. So if you can, just get them out as quick as possible. You know, if you're talking about maybe 10% of your bin, that would be aborts. Those are still totally safe to eat, consume, and do whatever you're gonna do with them. They're just not as big and as pretty. So, it really just depends on what you're going for. All right, so drying your mushrooms is the next big thing. Those take roughly about 100 degrees in a dehydrator. It's gonna take anywhere from 48 hours to 72 hours. It can take longer if you're really good at what you're doing, you had good airflow, and you grew a football-sized mushroom. It is gonna take a lot longer to dry out than somebody that grew a scalpel-sized mushroom. Across the board,
Freeze dryers?
you can use freeze dryers. It does actually help you maintain more health benefits across the board for anything that you put in a freeze dryer versus a dehydrator. So dehydrator, you're using all this heat, you are going to break down and destroy certain things throughout the process, even at low temps. Freeze dryers tend to have retain more nutritional value per pound than anything else. If you got a head of lion's mane and you freeze dry it, way more beneficial for you than throwing it into a dehydrator to powder up later. Shoot.
So if your objective is to fund mushrooms, does it matter if you go from a dry freezer to a dehydrator? Or
Not at all.
which one do you prefer, which one do you suggest?
So it really depends. For culinary, I recommend freeze drying if you're going for longevity. If you are doing the fun ones, I just recommend getting like a fancier dehydrator.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Do you have to dehydrate them?
Oh yeah. So there is always an exception to the rule. Good example, truffles. You're not gonna dehydrate a truffle. You know, you're gonna keep it fresh. You wanna keep those in the fridge, keep them, you know, relatively clean. Like what I'll typically tend to do is take a piece of paper towel, I'll spray a little bit of peroxide on it, and then set the truffles on top of that after I let the paper towel kind of dissipate for like 5 to 10 minutes. That tends to keep enough moisture in there that they don't tend to rot, and it keeps them in a nice clean environment for it. It doesn't affect the taste, doesn't affect the quality. But if you're doing dehydrator, you're trying to get these to the point where they snap like a potato chip. If it does not snap, and yeah, if you leave it in a zippy bag out in your house, you get a nice little rainstorm, the windows were open, that humidity in the house goes up, you are gonna rehydrate those mushrooms quick, fast, and in a hurry. And if you dehydrate them properly at 100 degrees, they will start to try to grow again. So just keep that in mind. You know, that's where a lot of people make their mistakes is, oh yeah, I thought they were dry, I put them into a jar, I came back a week later, everything in here is green.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't wanna eat that. Basically, if it looks funny, it is funny, don't eat it, you know? If you got greens, reds, and blues growing into your bin, you know, okay, green's usually trichoderma, red's usually a form of rust mold. All right, if you got blue, is it on the stem, is it on the cap? All right, is that bruising from me touching it that's causing that to turn blue? Is it, hey, my bin was too humid and I've been dropping raindrops on top of it and that's what caused it? If none of those things meet your criteria for why this thing is blue, it's probably got something going on inside of it causing that internal hemorrhage, basically. So, one last thing I really want to go over are these. These are our all-in-ones. Across the board, for most people getting started, this is your easiest and best friend for doing any of this. You are doing all of this process right on into the bag. You're not transplanting and going from this to that or doing, you know, all these different steps. Essentially, you're just cleaning off this front port. You're gonna put the same amount into this as you do with anything else. You know, you could be doing a 2-pound bag, a 4-pound bag, a 10-pound bag. It still only takes a maximum of 5 ml to get anything started, so half a syringe. You're gonna do the same thing that you did for your millet that we started earlier. You know, you see it pulling up on the bottom, just rotate it a little bit, get that moisture to move around inside of this bag and coat as much of this grain as you possibly can. And then you're gonna leave it alone for a few weeks. Once this bag gets all of that grain colonized on the bottom to at least 75%, you would then take this bag, and by then it's gonna start kind of inflating like this one did and like the other one did, and you're gonna break it all up and you're gonna mix it around inside of the bag. So now we're no longer dumping anything into another bag, we're not dumping it into another bin yet or anything like that. We're doing everything where your mycelium is the most susceptible to, you know, contaminants. It's all done in the bag, all right? Once this is fully mixed and you're happy with it, drop it on the counter like we did for the other one a couple of times. You know, it doesn't have to be 5 feet up in the air, just drop it from like 6-7 inches. That's gonna compact this all back down for you. Once you do that, you're gonna forget about it again for 2 weeks, just like you did with this one. We're gonna come back, hey, we got a nice healthy block just like this, and now we're gonna decide, all right, are we gonna cut our X's for our culinary, or are we doing a top fruiter? If you are using these bags for top fruiting mushrooms, you have 2 options for actually fruiting them out. First option, like we did earlier, you cut your slit, cover it with micro pore tape to get your fresh air in, or you can do what I like to do with these, which is make a modified sterilite bin for them. So if I wanted to fruit that whole block out and I was in like a 4-pound or a 7-pound, instead of putting holes about roughly 4 inches up on these bins, I can put them about a 1/2 inch up from the bottom. That is going to allow way more CO2 to actually get out of these bins. That is only practical for fruiting out the all-in-one blocks though. You would not, for a bin like this that we just put a cake in here, you would not want any holes down low because mushrooms are going to grow out of them. Things are going to get contaminated. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into the shop to see mushrooms literally growing out of filter patches, all right? It is only practical for the all-in-ones. You're still gonna leave your 2-inch holes up top, but the only difference is you're gonna go 1/4 inch holes, an inch space away from each other, about a 1/2 inch up from the bottom. You will then clean out the bin just like you did for everything else, and you're gonna clean off these bags to their most sterile you can get them. You will cut the entire block out of the bag and set the block into the bin. Depending on the size bin you go with, you can send a couple of them in there. I personally don't recommend it unless they're of the same strain, but personally, that's where you're gonna get your biggest yield with these bags. Because instead of it just fruiting on top, you have it fruiting from all 5 sides that are exposed. I've had these personally go for about 4 to 5 harvests for the 4-pounders in these bins like that. It all just depends on what you're going for and what your growing. Obviously, you know, lion's mane would be a little bit different if I tried to put an all-in-one in here. You know, you're not gonna take your side fruiting culinary mushrooms, cut them out of the bag and put them in here and fruit out that entire block like that. What would end up happening is you would pull so much moisture out of the block that the mushroom itself is actually not gonna have enough to grow, and it's going to abort itself. That's pretty much it. The only other thing I really wanna go over with everybody is,
No cocoa, no vermiculite.
that's already all
Oh,
mixed
it's all
in there.
mixed in.
So all of our substrates are already fully amended and fully, at field capacity for moisture.
Cool, cool.
If you were to ever buy a substrate from us and you got it home and you're like, yo, this looks really dry, call us. I will replace that, no problem. Same goes for any of our bags. You could buy a bag off of their shelf right now, get home, see a little green patch on the back of it, call the number on the card, we ship them right on out, or you can come back up here if they're cool with it. They'll swap it out and I just send them their bags.
Yep.
So it's across the board. We try to be very transparent with people on this. We know at the end of the day, nobody's gonna have 100% success. It's about us working with you to get you to that point where you're in the 90 percentile and going, you know what, I sneezed, that's what happened. Or, you know what, I've been messing with those bags so much, and you know, I got a picture where right in the bottom of the corner here, it's all green. Because you've been taking it, you've been throwing it around, you know, back and forth onto these shelves, you've broken the seal on it now. I'm still gonna work with you. I just want everybody to be able to grow something and have fun with it, you know? And if you're not gonna have fun with it, at least get some type of medicinal value from it. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician. I can't tell you that lion's mane's gonna do this for you, or the fun ones are gonna do that for you. That's about you as a person challenging yourself with those experiences to take it on and see what it actually does. I can go all day into personal experiences and tell you, hey, this is a horrible idea to take this much, or, you know, I took this much lion's mane and, you know, I felt like I was like super on top of everything, like, you know, almost like I was on ADHD medication. But that's my personal wiring to me, you know. He may be allergic to, you know, something that I'm not, you know,
I haven't found one yet.
oh, congratulations. I'm allergic to grass. Gosh, that sucks. That
I
really
just, I mowed grass for 15 years.
Yeah, no,
That would have been horrible.
yeah, that really sucked. First job after high school was landscaping. Found that out the hard way. Yeah, come home, hives. But, yeah. But yeah, all of this is gonna come down to what you want out of this as a grower and what strains you're growing. The last big thing I do wanna go over with everybody is rehydrating your blocks. There is a lot on rehydrating blocks that tends to get misconstrued and thrown around a lot, and just a lot of misinformation about it. The biggest one that we see people doing, and we are trying to curb people from doing, is just filling up a bucket of water as cold as you can get it and taking your whole block and soaking it in that water. You do not ever want to do that unless you are working on a bunch of culinary strains. If you are doing top fruiting mushrooms, dung lovers, anything of the sort, your best bet is to weigh your bin. Now, if, let's say I harvested 2 pounds of lion's mane head, right? That lion's mane is basically 75 to 90% water, depending on how it grew, the nutrients that it was able to uptake from the blocks, everything like that. You can basically go, hey, at, you know, 10 to 20% of that weight is what you're gonna convert into water weight. So for most people across the board, for the blocks that they're doing, it ends up equating out to somewhere between roughly 250 milliliters to 750 milliliters for like a bin like this, or like a 7-pound all-in-one, where you would just take bottled distilled water, add that in there, let it sit in there for about roughly, I'd say 20-30 minutes. If there's still any water that hasn't been wicked up at that point, dump it out, all right? That is all it takes to rehydrate these do not pull these blocks out and soak them. If you were doing like lion's mane outside, you want to rehydrate a block with a garden hose and get yourself a dechlorinator filter. That'll at least keep down on some of the stuff that you could be putting onto it so that it keeps it a little bit cleaner. Yeah. Anybody got any questions?
Collect rainwater.
You can collect rainwater, but I would strongly recommend boiling it, mostly for the bacterias that are in there.
Yeah.
Most of them are going to be harmful to what you're trying to do. So,
Yeah, suppose we're doing fun ones, and we're looking to get the most out of the block. The tub
is the way to go.
Seems like the way to
Yep.
go, because once you trim, I mean.
Yeah, so like if you're in an all-in-one bag, right? And
You're only gonna get it on that top of that bag.
exactly.
Okay.
So now there's a give and take to that. So let's say I harvest out of this bag once, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't the cleanest, and I got a little bit of contamination on the bag or inside of here. Depending on where that contamination is located, we could, in theory, clean up the environment, roll that rim down, spray the bag down with a little bit of peroxide, and you could basically cut that first inch off of the top with a sterile knife and attempt to get a second harvest out of it. It is not a guarantee. It realistically, the risk usually outweighs the reward in that type of scenario, but it really just depends. Like personally, once I get a flush out of something, as long as I'm able to make a clone of it, that's all that matters to me. If I got a clone of that genetic, I know that I have it preserved, I know I can put it into more bags later, that's all I care about. And if I see a little bit of green, yunk, you know, I'm gonna, like if you see green in a corner here, sure, you could cover it with salt, you could spray it with peroxide, you could cut, you know, an extra 2 inches away from that corner and cut that whole thing out and try to remove it. The issue is most of the things that are gonna actually show where you've already got a fruiting mass is going to be stuff that it also spores out, like trichoderma.
As soon as you touch it.
As soon as you touch it, you blow on it, anything, it's just blowing spores around that bin. Sure, you cleaned up this area, but now everything else is now contaminated by it. God help you if you drop that block while you're getting it out of there too, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
oh, I pulled it out and I had my fan right here and I just blew that across my entire grow field. So, you know, just keep in mind to be safe with it. Anybody else?
Yeah, so you said we can, we can reuse them already made bags?
Yeah, so basically you harvest your mushrooms out of these bags or bins or whatever. Roughly 5 to 12 days, depending on strain, these will start growing again. Yeah, so usually I personally get about 2 to 3 harvests out of these bins before what I notice is a lot of slowdown. Like it's no longer taking about that 10-day mark for them to start producing again.
Right.
Usually once you see that slowdown, it's just because there's not enough moisture left in the block.
Okay.
You can rehydrate it at that point and they'll start doing it again. I mean, I've rehydrated them 3-4 times. I've had bins that'll go for up to 8 months. You're not gonna get a ton of mushrooms after that, you know, 3rd or 4th harvest, but you get some show pieces, like, you know, this being the smallest out of some of the stuff that would come out of there. So, I mean, if you're going for like those true warrior, you know, hero doses, that's coming later on in your bin or bag's life. It just depends on what you're going for.
Right.
Me, I want uniformity. What I want is a nice average size where across the board, when I flush these out, I'm getting the maximum amount of output per square inch. You know, you're dealing with inches when it comes down to mushrooms. You're not dealing with square feet like you're growing cannabis, you know?
Right.
Like, I know if I fill a 4 foot by 4 foot trellis with cannabis, hey, that's about roughly 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds. I fill a bin with mushrooms and I can look at it, I can go, hey, that's a pound wet weight, it'll be like 4 ounces dry, and then you dry it out and you got like 1.5 ounces because they're all of a sudden there's no density to these or anything like that. Like there's nothing with mushrooms that's gonna increase density or do this or do that.
Right.
Anything that you can use would be so freaking harmful to you, it wouldn't even be funny. And it's more harmful to you making those products and using those products than it is to the person eating it.
Right.
So,
I'm guessing after you get done and you don't use it no more, you can be good in composting too, right?
100%. That being said though, if you are going to compost blocks, look up where and what mushrooms grow naturally in your area before composting them. Good example, golden oysters are an invasive species in Michigan. They actually,
All across America.
yeah, so, you know, if you're going to be throwing these outside, make sure you're putting ones out that are, you're happy to have in the neighborhood and that aren't going to outcompete other mushrooms that you may want to pick later on. You know, if you got a vast majority of morel people that are, you know, throughout Michigan, throughout Ohio, you have a known morel patch and you have your compost pile that you're throwing all these golden oysters into, you no longer have a morel patch. They will outcompete them and it'll fight off the sclerotia that's in the soil there that's producing your morels, and congratulations, you no longer have morels there. Now, if you want to grow more morels in that area, take a couple of them, throw them into a blender with some sterilized water, and basically
Make a slurry.
pass that slurry right on out as close to the base of the trees as you can get.
Yep.
So,
So Grant, what do you
something
do?
about using pots, and then you just take the spores, take the top, and then you can replant it or something like that. It'll
yes and
kinda
no.
like
So like if you're really lucky and you're within the same area and there's enough biodiversity that's willing to be synergetic with everything,
Yeah.
sure they'll take off, but you got like a 1 in, I'd say 20 chance of it actually taking.
Okay.
Whereas like doing a slurry, you got probably closer to a 1 in 5 for getting them going. Cause like we've done them in bags, and like you're trying to take these bags that you've been babying and you put them outside against Mother Nature and they're just getting their ass kicked. Right. So, yeah.
Once I'm done with the all-in-one grow bag, can I just throw it like in my garden, whatever reproduce that specific strain of mushroom when I'm?
Possibly, yes.
Because I'm growing, like right now, I'm accidentally growing ink cap and turkey tail all over my garden, so I thought maybe if I just have enough, something I can maybe.
If you were doing the fun ones and that, they will never outcompete turkey tail or ink caps. Most of your dung-loving mushrooms will never be able to beat out the culinary ones.
And yellow sanctitolis, maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. That's the wheat mushroom.
Maybe Tampanenses might have a better chance because they got the sclerotia underneath, but it's such a crapshoot. Like first,
Tampanensis.
yeah, but yeah,
There's
you
only
can,
two known in Florida that are actually real.
yeah,
They're all based off of those two.
yeah,
Restraint.
but yeah, you can compost them, but chances are they're not going to outcompete your turkey tail or ink caps. And if you really want to get rid of them, there's plenty of ways to defungicide yourself or whatever, you know. One other big thing I just thought about is taking spore prints. So this is probably the best and easiest way for most beginners to, you know, keep something going for themselves. Realistically, all you need is a little bit of tin foil, a little bit of alcohol. You're going to sterilize the tin foil real quick, and then essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take your nice cap, something where the veil has basically just started ripping, you're at least 25 to 50% ripped. You're going to cut that cap right off from that stem, and you're going to set that cap onto your tin foil. And I just tend to fold the tin foil over it to make kind of like a little teepee effect so that no air gets in or out or blows on it or anything like that. Roughly 4 hours later, if you come back, you're going to just see a nice pitch black little spore print for yourself there. Those spore prints, you can take those spores, you can scrape them onto agar, they'll start growing. You could add them to a sterile solution and you know, actually make a living culture from them if you really wanted to. Syringe them. You can throw them into, you know, a nice little sterile zippy bag, keep them in the fridge indefinitely for a couple of years if you really wanted to. But it's a great way to preserve your genetics, and you can do that for pretty much any mushroom, wine caps, all that fun stuff. You cut the head off, and something's going to usually drop down from it. There's always, again, exceptions to the rules, like some of the albino strains when you're in the fun ones, they don't even drop spores, you have to actually put them into a centrifuge.
They're sterile.
Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions? I think I did good.
You did.
You
Yeah.
did.
Well done.
Well, thank you guys all for coming out today. Honestly, I really appreciate it. It makes it so that we keep doing these things around town and keep teaching people. We do have a little bit of a raffle to do real quick. Did I miss anybody for raffle tickets? No? Alright,
What is it?
little raffle.
Oh, yeah.
So, I brought a couple all-in-ones and I brought some syringes with me to give out. Somebody's gonna win a 7-pounder and a blue
Did you
meat,
fill one out, Ian?
a 4-pounder and penis envy, and then I have Tidal Wave, Orissa, and Colombian Rust as well. So we're gonna start off with those three, and then we'll work on to the big all-in-ones.
Something in science.
Alright, first one. 214.
Oh, that's you.
214.
214. Take your pick. You want Colombian Rust, Orissa India, or Tidal Wave?
I never had the title with
Tidal Wave. Pass that down for me, please. Alright. Second one. 217. You want